In 2009, I was deployed in Iraq, and one of the U.S. soldiers that was there got killed. And I remember saying to myself, today wasn't my day, it was his day, but one day it will be my day. And I think that I was able to leverage that and say, hey, let's squeeze as much out of this life as we can.
One of the ways you squeezed it was podcasting. Why did you decide one day that you would pick up a few cameras, asking people questions, and put that online?
So,
Anthony Pompliano is the founder and CEO of Professional Capital Management and the host of the Pomp Podcast.
One of the most renowned and watched shows in the crypto and finance space.
How did you get so fascinated by the world of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies?
I think a lot of people don't want to admit it, but most people are drawn because they think they can make money. People show up and it's like, we're going to change the world. We're going to... Shut the fuck up.
It takes a level of obsession to achieve greatness.
What were you doing on Saturday morning? Because I was at the office. You see me doing this, you think it's like so sad that I have to do this. I enjoy doing it.
Why is understanding the concept of leverage so important?
You have finite energy, you have finite time, and you have finite attention. You are limited, and leverage lets you do more with less.
You used to be a Bitcoin maxi. You built your personal brand around Bitcoin.
I was never a hardcore Bitcoin maximalist. I made a very conscious decision. I am not comfortable talking about these other coins and things like that because having this large audience, people are going to listen to me. So if I start talking about every new shitcoin that comes out, the odds are that people are going to lose money.
Have you ever struggled with mental health? 69% of the people who watch this podcast have not subscribed. If you enjoy this show, if it provides value to you in one way, shape, or form, can I please ask you a little favor? Can you click that subscribe button, give this video a like, and leave a comment down below? It helps this show more than you can imagine. My goal is to bring the absolute biggest and brightest people on this channel, and the best way to get there is to have all of us rally together and build the When Shift Happens family. Thank you. This conversation is supported by Jupiter, the most used decentralized trading platform on Solana and the largest DAO in the world. Castcard, my go-to card to spend my stablecoins directly with my Apple Pay to buy anything, food, coffee, or plane tickets without having to use a bank ever again. Bitwise Asset Management, the crypto specialist asset manager with more than $10 billion in client assets and more than 30 crypto solutions across ETFs, index funds, alpha strategies, staking, and more. Sui, a scalable layer 1 blockchain that's fast, secure, and affordable, built by previous Facebook developers, and that delivers the benefits of Web3 with the ease of Web2. To support this show, please check the sponsors links in the description down below.
You ready?
I'd like to start organic. We're rolling already.
Oh,
I didn't tell you. But I can't pause that. I can't pause that. All right. Bang, bang. Let's start with the basics, Anthony. Where does the bang bang that you use to start each of your podcasts with come from?
I just said it one day. Somebody commented. I said, "Oh, you like that?" And so I said it again, and more people commented, and I just kept going.
That's it.
That's it.
I think that's how a lot of things happen in business, actually. It comes from other people.
Yeah. Well, it's when you're creating content, there's a blessing and a curse with an audience reaction. On one hand, if you do something and the audience responds positively, you're incentivized to do more of it. So you can think of that like A/B testing in business, right? You're testing these different things. There's a free market of ideas. Your content either cuts through the noise or it doesn't. The downside to that is that you can get audience capture. And so you see this with a lot of like the prank YouTubers and stuff like that. The first prank is like, let me go up and like, pull someone's pants down or something. Okay. But then all of a sudden, next thing you know, they're doing some crazy prank that's illegal, right? And you're like, they're just going bigger and bigger and bigger. And eventually you just got to do something so absurd. And you go talk to them like, what are you doing? And they're like, I don't know how I got here. They're just constantly trying to, impress the audience. And so you got to be careful as to, what are the good parts of that audience response, but also avoid the true audience capture.
That's a big problem with media, actually, in general. You might end up doing things more for the views than from what you initially intend. And then you actually lose motivation and you can burn out like that.
100%.
You'll be surprised at what you can receive if you just ask. This is one of the few quotes I borrowed from your book, How to Live an Extraordinary Life. And this is pretty much how I got here today. I just asked, what's the greatest thing that has ever happened to you after you just asked?
My wife married me. Yeah, that was.
I was suspecting this one actually.
Yeah. But not necessarily. By the time you propose, you're like 90% confident. There's always the like, am I going to be the one idiot who somehow misread the situation and she's not going to say yes or something like that. But actually, the first day we met, we had coffee or whatever, and I messaged her afterwards. And I knew she was leaving town, and I said to her, "Do you want to get dinner tonight as well?" And you can imagine. I mean, you just met somebody. It went well. You think you're obviously interested in this person, but still, it's like a double text, like a double date in the same day, right? You're like, she can be cool with that, or she could just think like, who's this crazy person? I asked, we went to dinner, and now married, got kids, and life is great.
Your life changes once you realize that no one else's opinion matters, except maybe your wife's. As long as you know who you are.
Mm-hmm.
Who are you?
Well, I think you're different people in different situations, right? If you think about who you are as a brother, as a son, as a husband, as a father, in those situations, people need something different from you. And so maybe the commonality is that you constantly think about like serving other people or being helpful to other people, being a resource for them. But what my brothers need me to be is very different than what my kids need me to be. Or if I treated my brothers the way I treat my kids, my brothers would be ready to beat my ass, right? They'd be like, leave me alone. And so I think a lot about, what is the situation? Who are you interfacing with? And what does this situation and this person call for? What do they need from you? At work, it's very different. If one business, I am the CEO, that's a different role, different kind of engagement than if I'm an investor. It's a different role and engagement than if I'm just one person on the team of the business. And so constantly trying to be self-aware of kind of the context, the environment, and the people allows you to, kind of context switch, but also role switch depending on what the situation calls for.
So we can call you Chameleon Pump.
Well, I think everyone does it, right? One of the things I remember is when the pandemic happened and everyone got pushed into their homes, I could say unconstitutionally locked in their home, but that's another topic. What ended up happening was there was all these people who were talking online like, oh my God, I didn't know I was married to the like, let's circle back guy, right? Or like, I didn't know that I was married to the like synergy woman, right? And so the lesson I saw from there was the language you speak changes when you're at work versus when you're at home. Imagine saying to your wife, let's circle back on that tomorrow. She'd be like, what did you just say to me? Right? At work, that's just like the corporate vernacular or whatever. And so I don't think that this is like a new thing. I think everyone does it. It's just the people who are really good at it or self-aware of it, the people who tend to kind of just go through life and don't pay attention to it, a lot of times they end up actually leaving something to be desired or room for improvement.
What guy were you at home during COVID?
I'm chill all the time.
But were you that let's circle back guy, or this is just another example from someone else you've heard?
Oh, no,
what would your now wife say? You're that guy.
The only time that I've ever said anything on a call where she was like, kind of, like the record scratches, right? The music stops is, I one time said something to somebody like, it would behoove you. And she was like, you're not that smart. Like, where did you learn that word? That's too big of a word for you. And she had walked in the room, and I'm on speakerphone talking to someone, and she just gave me this look, and I was like, what? I was like, oh God, afterwards she told me.
I can be that guy too.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, exactly.
You mentioned before that you are a different person depending on who you are talking to. If you had to explain what it is you do and why, what would you say?
I think we just try to solve problems, right? At its core. Somewhere along the way, that became like weird to describe it that way. But really, that's the way I think about business, investing, content. It's just like, what is the problem? What is the thing that you're doing to solve that problem for one or many people? And the way that kind of shows up in the world is we build companies, we buy companies, we invest in companies, we invest in assets in general. We're just constantly looking for what are the problems that are out there and how can we be a part of the solution. Sometimes we want to be a huge part of the solution. Okay, let's go build a company. Other times we want to help fund somebody else being part of the solution. And so just constantly thinking about, what are the problems and let's go find solutions.
Do you try to solve as many problems as possible, or do you focus on one big problem?
I think it is our responsibility not to work on any one single problem. And the common advice is focus. But if you actually look at the people who have been highly successful throughout their life, they almost never focus on one thing, which is like the great lie. Mark Zuckerberg has built probably one of the most important charitable organizations in the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. He's been doing it for at least a decade. So you look at that and you say to yourself, well, he didn't start it the same day, but when he was at Harvard, he was building Facebook, he was going to school, he was, doing all these different things. And so I do think that there's this really, really, really valuable kind of experience that's gathered from having interactions with different groups of people, different environments, but also being able to escape thinking about one thing to go and work on something else. And then what you start to realize is you will start to see patterns, you'll start to see trends in a way that you couldn't see if you were just focused on one single thing. And it doesn't have to be, you run two businesses. You don't have to be Elon and have, 5, 6 businesses. Jeff Bezos, multiple businesses, right? Some people do it all within one company. So if you look at Larry and Sergey at Google, they had everything from they were trying to bring internet to the world to they were trying to sell ads on the search engine, right? And all kinds of things in between. How the heck did they get into self-driving cars? Your search engine, right? So you can do it inside of one company. But the other thing is, some people say, you know what? I go to work every day. I'm a mid-level manager at an accounting firm. And I really enjoy doing this work. And, it's good pay. It provides a life for my family. And on the weekends, I am aggressively pursuing becoming a better amateur golfer, right? And so people say like, oh, that's just a hobby. But I say the people that I really respect, they put just as much time, effort, intentionality into going after things that might not be what you would think of as a traditional job or traditional company, but they're still interested in it.
What is that for you?
Well, I mean, look, we have a ton of businesses. I've invested in over 250 private companies at this point. All of that alone is very intellectually stimulating. I spend a ton of time with my family. I think that the way people think of kids, family, and like their relationship to time is maybe a little bit off compared to how I think about it. And then I read a lot. I meet people a lot. It's just constantly like I want to take as many inputs as I can from as many different areas as I can, synthesize that, and then turn around and take those learnings and push them back out into the world in the form of solutions.
Dear When Shift Happens family, the following message is probably the single most important thing you should take away from today's podcast. If you're serious about your crypto investing journey, please take some time to learn how to self-custody your assets to make sure that nobody can take your coins away. Ever. If you don't learn how to be your own bank, it is very likely that one day you will lose all your hard-earned crypto. The safest way to hold your crypto is in a cold storage that we also call hardware wallets. Hardware wallets are not complicated and they give you peace of mind. I personally use a hardware wallet called Trezor. It is open source, very easy to use, and the first hardware wallet created ever. As we like to say it in crypto, not your keys, not your coin. You can order your Trezor wallet with a 10% discount by following the link in the description down below and by using the promo code WSH10. And now back to the episode.
There's a common pattern across the people who are interviewed on this podcast who are all very successful. They often had some sort of childhood trauma or a life experience that gave them a huge fire in the belly. What happened in your life that gave you that hunger for success?
I don't think there's any like one thing. There's certain things in life that have like a huge impact on you. We can talk about those, but I probably believe a little bit more than most that you're kind of born wired a certain way. And I can go back and I can trace since I was very young the way I am today makes a ton of sense because of who I was then. I started my first business, I was probably like 12, right? And I didn't know what a business was. I didn't know what I was doing. All I knew was there was a way to make money, and I wanted money. Why do I want money? Not because having $20, made me any cooler or anything like that. It's because then I had $20 where I could go do things and I have to go ask my parents for permission for something, right? And so I think that that's a very common story for a lot of entrepreneurs is they're actually not chasing money. What they're doing is they're chasing some degree of freedom or the ability to kind of act, unilaterally. And so that can be empowerment, that can be all these different things. But I think I just always wanted to, kind of be in control of what I wanted to do with my time, my effort, et cetera. And then I think that, parallel to like the professional world, there are these personal experiences that we have that probably change our trajectory because it changes the way that we see the world, right? And for me, in 2009, February 21st, 2009, I was deployed in Iraq, and there was an incident. One of the U.S. soldiers that was there got killed. And I remember saying to myself, that could have been me. And today wasn't my day. It was his day. But one day it will be my day. And I was 20 years old. And I think that I just had this, like, in a crazy way of looking at it, a very fortunate opportunity in an unfortunate situation to learn mortality. So that, some people don't learn that till they're 75. And they're like, I only got 2 years left or something. For me, I learned it at 20. And I think that I just was able to, really leverage that and say, hey, let's squeeze as much out of this as we can, because like it's very obvious to me now, what the end is.
One of the way you squeezed it was podcasting before it became a big trend. And I joined the Bitcoin and crypto space around late 2018, early 19. And I started to watch a lot of content. And obviously I found your content. And I remember watching your podcast with Murad Mahmudov. I think it was November 2019. Murad went from Bitcoin Maxi to blowing up a fund to now a meme coin Jesus. And I have to say, I remember the exact, because he had this strategy of saying, hey, you should lever Bitcoin 1.5x, something like that. And then you're going to do amazing. And then he blew up the fund. And I thought it was an incredible idea. So I did the same. And in March crash, I lost all my Bitcoin. But anyway, that's not the topic. The topic is podcasting was not obvious back then. There was Joe Rogan since maybe 10 years, but like all the other big ones came kind of like afterwards, right? They're probably starting around the same time. And then there was the COVID wave, and this propelled a lot of them to like a next level. Why did you decide one day that you would pick up a few cameras and film yourself asking people questions and put that online?
So it's funny. People always see the one that works, but I had actually started what now would be called a podcast in 2011 or 2012. And I was living in Raleigh, North Carolina. I was building a company, and I wanted to learn. And so I started to get people in the local community to come to the office I was working out of. And in a conference room, there's only one camera. And they didn't even have, enough cameras and all this stuff. And I basically was able to record those conversations. And it was like local entrepreneurs in that area teaching me what they knew. And bad market selection, like all the things that would make a podcast successful, but no one talked about them as like a podcast, right? It was just like a kind of show thing that you do, but it became obvious, like you can get people to come talk to you if you're able to give them some exposure. And so I ended up selling the business. I went to Facebook, and years later, when I actually started the podcast, it took me a while to remember that I even had done that other thing, but it was like, oh, I actually have some practice in having done this. So I don't know. It's just, kind of an idea's time has come. A bunch of people started sometime between, call it 2017 and 2020. And, it just grew from there.
When did you start the Pomp podcast?
So I started the Twitter stuff in January of 2017. I made a very conscious decision. I'm going to grow on Twitter. I started the Substack in May of 2018, I think, and the podcast like August or September of 2018.
So YouTube, August 2018, more or less.
YouTube, we really didn't start getting serious about until 2020.
You had a lot of people, big people on your show. And this happened fairly quickly because you said you started to focus really in 2020. You had Andrew Tate, Balaji, Chamath. Have you ever sat down? Because the same is happening with me. I started this like about 2 years ago. Every week in studio. Have you ever sat down and thought about how it's possible that with a simple podcast, you can talk to the biggest and smartest people in the world within just a year of two of hustling?
No.
Does it? Exactly. It doesn't. Does it make sense? Because if you try to think about it, what we're doing here is we're just talking. There's 2 mics, 3 cameras. We're going to put this online. It's so basic.
Yeah.
But yet you can end up in front of like amazing people fairly quickly. If you do something different and you do it well and you do it with
it goes back to this idea of there's a problem in the world, right? And if you provide the right solution, then you can end up in front of anyone. But there's a lot of people I know who start podcasts who they end up both guest-wise in front of no one, but also audience-wise, they end up in front of no one. And so it goes back to this idea of like, how do you cut through the noise? Because you have to cut through the noise. It has to be unique, has to be valuable, it has to be informative, it has to be entertaining, you know, whatever your combination of those things is, that's how you cut through the noise. If you cut through the noise, then you got a shot at building an audience. But really, how do you get larger and larger and larger guests is you get a bigger and bigger audience. So if you want, you know, I don't know, Warren Buffett to come on your podcast, you can't show up and be like, I have 5 people in the audience. What you need is you need somebody who, David Rubenstein has a show, or you need, you know, the guy who runs the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Norway, or you need somebody who has, you know, some special audience that Buffett really wants to get to. Now, the thing is, Buffett probably not going to do a podcast anyways, right? So he's kind of like the ghost of podcasts. You can't catch him. But there's a bunch of other people who will do a podcast. And so whether that is the Mark Zuckerbergs, the Jeff Bezos, you know, whatever, like Lex Friedman's a great example. Lex was able to get Jeff Bezos to do a podcast. People say, that's crazy. Well, it makes a lot of sense, right? Jeff wanted to start to create content and communicate with people in a new format. So he went somewhere where he had a guest who invested a lot of time and effort to make sure it was high quality. He had long form conversations, didn't interrupt the guests and stuff. So Jeff could actually share his ideas without like gotcha, you know, journalism type stuff. And then Lex's audience was big and intelligent. Makes complete sense. If you look at like Dwarkesh Patel, right? Dwarkesh has done a fantastic job, right? I met him before he started the podcast. And I remember when he did the first episode, I remember just being like, if he can do this consistently at this level of quality, this thing is going to get huge. Now he's got Satya Nadella coming on his podcast, the CEO of Microsoft, right? Why? Because he's curated a very large, specific audience that Satya wants to be in front of to get, you know, a message out.
Is that enough? Because from what I realized is the audience, I mean, mine is not huge yet, but you need the right intro. And actually building the network, which people don't really understand, podcasting is actually building a network on steroids, is what will help you. Because at a certain level, the people will maybe look a bit at the audience, but they will listen to their friend who they trust, who tells them, go on this podcast.
It's both. So certain people can kind of network their way, but Dwarkesh literally saw that Satya was, I think, reading his email. And he just saw, it was like Satya at Microsoft.com or whatever. He just sent him a cold email, said, hey, I see that you read this. Would you want to come on the podcast? And I think if I remember the story correctly, Satya responded in like 4 minutes on a Saturday afternoon and was like, yes, this person will coordinate or whatever, right? And so you think about that, you say to yourself, sure, there are plenty of people who only get certain guests because they network their way. But also, there's a lot of people who they simply ask. They find a way to communicate, they ask, and it happens.
Yeah. Why is understanding the concept of leverage so important for aspiring entrepreneurs?
Well, you have finite energy, you have finite time, and you have finite attention. And so if you have only so much time, attention, and energy, then you are limited to a certain number of things you can work on, a certain number of outcomes, a certain amount of time you can spend on each thing. Leverage lets you do more with less, right? And so if you can take that same amount of time, and now rather than spend, think of my day, just use something that's very practical. I have the same amount of time as you have. And a lot of people would say, how are you involved with so many different businesses? Well, we have really, really excellent people who are running our various businesses. And those people, some of them know nothing about business and we're teaching them and they're growing. And, some of them will make it, some of them won't. Others already came to us and they were excellent, but every single one of them is a form of leverage. And so I am getting leverage because we have these people, but it works in reverse as well. They're getting leverage because we have a whole team of people who are very experienced in running operations and finance and legal and, kind of strategy and stuff like that. We have leverage because we have an audience that we can use to actually get the word out and not have to spend money on marketing. So what you want is these win-win situations where we're getting leverage and they're getting leverage. And then that becomes really interesting because now what you do is you put together a team and that team all is benefiting. They're all getting leverage from each other. No different than the championship basketball team. It's not always the best player in the league. It's the best team in the league. And so what you want is you may have, a center who is like, hey, I'm good. But if I don't have a good point guard who can get me the ball, it might not work. And so I think just a lot about how do you coordinate with those around you to get leverage on your time, your energy, your attention. But you can only do it if you're also returning to them some form of leverage that makes their situation better.
So you talked about the team and the people, which is human capital leverage, one of the kind of oldest form of leverage. But one that you really understood years ago is media, new form of leverage through podcasting and personal branding. Why is podcasting so good to build leverage?
Well, I think it's just one form, right? So, it's always this weird thing where there's a meta to talking about podcasting on a podcast, right? But what is the media industry, the traditional media industry? They basically arbitrage the attention of people and they figure out ways to make money. That attention can be newspapers, it can be radio, it could be TV, it could be events, it could be all kinds of different forms. But if they get attention, they find out ways to monetize it. The monetization is they can sell subscriptions, newsletter subscriptions, right? Or newspaper subscriptions. They can sell ads that are more brand awareness type ads. They can sell direct response type stuff. They can sell products through their distribution. They can have live events. They can do all these different things, right? And so that kind of heuristic, if you will, of attention is turned into dollars is really the core of the media. Podcasts are no different, right? Now, some people are operating podcast and the value that they are being paid is economic. They're making money. Some people are being paid in what I call equity value, meaning that there is value that is accruing to their business or the product they've created or whatever. And so they don't worry about getting paid, via ad dollars or subscriptions, but they're saying, hey, if I can get more people to buy my product that I have in this business, the podcast is worth it. And then some people are accruing reputational capital. And so if you go and you look at, take like the All In podcast. Maybe they're a great example. They don't put ads and they always give Jason a hard time. And Jason wants to put the ads, he thinks they're $25, $50 million, whatever the crazy numbers are, right? Why is Chamath and David Sachs and David Freeberg and even Jason to a degree doing it if they're not getting paid? Well, they're accumulating social, reputational, type capital. And so I just think about, the media industry, everyone calls it like new media. It's actually not new. The form factor may be new, but the mechanism of attention converting to, value, economic or social is, just the same as it was 200-300 years ago.
it takes a level of obsession to achieve greatness. There is a common thing that made you great at all what you do, podcasting, personal brand, investing, Bitcoin, and that is obsession. What does that close friend who complains about you or me disappearing for 2 or 3 years not understand about what it takes to become really great at something?
I think there's a lot of people who do things that they don't actually care about because they think that's what they're supposed to do. So when they do that, it's very easy to get deterred and they aren't passionate about it. And if you're not passionate about it, then eventually you're just like, I don't care. Now, that doesn't mean that you can only work on things that you're really, really passionate about, because you may just be passionate about building companies and, solving a problem. And then somebody could tell you a problem and you're like obsessed about, being the problem solver. But I do think that most of the mistakes I see are people who are doing things they think they're supposed to be doing. But when you kind of prod them and you say, what did you do over the weekend? Like, we have people who work in our business who will come to me and they'll bring some problem. And it usually is, I don't like what I'm doing at work. I'm not getting paid enough money. I want more responsibility. I mean, all the normal, kind of HR type stuff. And I always say to them, I say, okay, what were you doing on Saturday morning? Because I was at the office. That's not me bragging about working hard, whatever. It's that I genuinely look forward to whatever day, time, whatever, because I know that nobody else is going to bother me, so I can actually get work done. Right? And so it comes down to this idea of like, sure, you can characterize it as like, oh, obsession, whatever. But like at the end of the day, it's like, I genuinely enjoy doing this stuff. And I remember we had a conversation one time, my wife and I, and she was getting a little frustrated because I was, at work all day and I'd come home and she'd be like, okay, what are you going to do? And I'm like, well, I got to start working. She's like, you've been at work all day. And I'm like, no. I was meeting with people, from 8 o'clock to 5:30, 6 o'clock and 30-minute meetings back to back all day. Now I got to do my work, right? That was everyone else's work. Like, now I got to do my stuff. And so, she was just like, I don't get it. And, I said to her, you see me doing this, you think that it's like so sad that I have to do this. I enjoy doing it.
How much do you enjoy that part of the day when you have to do all this HR stuff? Because entrepreneurs, usually, they're less wired towards that.
Of course, but I think that it is, if you're trying to get better at all times, then you can look at it as, I have to do this stuff versus I get to do this stuff. And the way that I always think about it is, even in the times where I'm doing things that aren't necessarily, if I had to pick out of all the things to do in a day, like this is the thing I would do. What lesson can I take out of this so that I then can feed it back into the system to prevent me from having to deal with this again? And so if you look at, from the first business we ever started until today, we are exponentially much better, both from how we structure them, how we recruit certain people to the team, how do we structure their compensation, how do we think about operating the business on a day-to-day basis, how do we make decisions, like all that stuff has improved. But almost every single one of those improvements I can tie to, did this, that was a pain in the ass, banged my head against the wall, don't want to do that again, let's go improve that system,
Absolutely.
And frankly, like maybe one of the best areas that you can easily see this is when you start a company, the first time, especially if you're like incubating it and partnering with somebody, there's a lot of things that you don't yet know that you need to discuss in order to set expectations up front. There's easy stuff, right? What is your job going to be? What's my job going to be? Are we going to be in the office? Or are we going to be remote? Like, I mean, there's, basic stuff. But over time, especially when you do a bunch of them like we have, you begin to see the same problems pop up and you realize this is only a problem because we didn't have the clarity and expectation setting up front. So now if we go start a business, I almost have a checklist.
Yeah.
Here's all the different things that I know are potential kind of potholes along the way. Let's just talk through them. And we may identify something that you and I disagree on. Okay, we can either work through it and come to an agreement, or maybe we just shouldn't do this together. But that clarity of expectation setting up front makes everything so much easier. And so I just think a lot about this idea of like obsession. How many people really get excited about creating that checklist? Not that many people. Unless you're like, I want to perfect the craft of doing this thing. right?
This one hits too hard because it's my main frustration in my business is I don't want to do this shit, right? But then I end up frustrated and it's my fault.
Yes.
Ultimately, I'm like, fuck, it's my fault. Things were not clear.
But it's not unique, I think, to you or I. I think there's a lot of entrepreneurs who you usually see it when they start their second business. The first time, it's kind of like your hair's on fire. Oh my God, imposter syndrome. I can't believe this is working. Don't tell anyone, right? Because they're going to figure out that this thing is like a house of cards. It's going to all fall apart tomorrow. The software is going to stop working. The customers are going to leave, whatever. The second time, part of it, I think, is like they gain a little bit of confidence. And like, maybe I do know a little bit about this. 2, they practice, they have experience. But 3 is they also understand how important some of the inputs in the beginning are. So if you have confidence that what you're going to do is going to work, you take a lot of the details more seriously in the beginning because you're like, this thing that 1 percentage point of equity in a thing that probably isn't going to work is actually less valuable than 1% of equity in a thing that you have very high confidence is going to work, right? And so now maybe actually I should spend a lot more time thinking about the vesting schedule for our employees so that they're incentivized to help make the company successful. And if they are a big component of that, they really, really benefit from it. But if you're like, hey, you and me are just going to flippantly start something, let's see what happens.
Yeah.
We might not even talk about equity, right?
Yeah, or we'll probably argue about some equity that is never going to be worth anything. You mentioned before your wife's frustration because you say, I'm so obsessed I go to the office on Saturday because I need to work, right? The other day you tweeted, don't be that guy who does 80 hours a week for 50 years and then he dies. This is kind of contradictory.
It's not because 2 things. One, here's a little alpha for the dads out there. I bring my kids with me on Saturday to the office. So we're spending quality time together where a mom is free to do things and get a break.
What do the kids do while you're working?
They work. They have like a little computer and but they're excited, right? They're like it's a special time. Like I get to go to the office with my dad on the weekends and do this stuff.
How old are you? How old are they?
They're under the age of 5. And so you can imagine, they watch some cartoons, they draw, they've got, arts and crafts and stuff. And I'm not working 100% of the time. We're, engaging and stuff. But what you're doing is you're melding work and life together, right? And so here in our office, my wife works out of the office, my brother works out of the office, my kids very often are around the people that we work with. It's just this belief that like you design the life you want to live, and I don't want to have 2 separate lives, like a professional life and a personal life. But also, if you think about during the week, I don't work 80 hours. I work a lot, but I'm very intentional about I leave the office by a certain time every single day.
Which is?
It varies from time to time. But I'm intentional about that on a given week because I know that, for example, I want to see my kids when they wake up and I want to see them before they go to sleep. I don't want to go a day where I don't see my kids. So when I was younger, I may get up and go to the office 7 a.m. and not come home till 8 or 9. Well, with young kids, you won't see them, right? So when you think about it from that perspective, you have to make a choice. Maybe I got to do a call before I go to the office, but the trade-off is I get to see my kids. And so as a family, we understand the kind of nuances. So like most people, I think, especially young men, what I have seen is they take pride in like, I'm going to work 80 hours a week, etc. The problem that I've seen is as you take on more responsibility in terms of, significant other, kids, marriage, all this kind of stuff, your time gets compressed. Your wife don't give a shit what's going on at work if it's going to cost life at home, right? Now, if you are able to communicate, hey, here are the things that are important, And these are kind of the non-negotiables for you, your wife, your kids, whatever, right? Everyone kind of puts their cards on the table, and then you figure out how to design your life. And so when you do that now, that sounds a lot like time management, right? But also maybe instead of working 6 a.m., 7 a.m. to 8, 9 o'clock at night, Monday through Friday, well, what if actually you work less hours during the week and you add some hours on the weekend? You enjoy doing it anyways, right? There's times probably people at our office hate me on Sunday afternoons. I got some free time. I start calling people. What's going on? What's the update? What's this? Whatever, right? But like, I'm thinking about this stuff, right? And so thankfully, we got a lot of people who they also are thinking about this stuff. But maybe that time on Sunday afternoon isn't actually, like overworking, because you're able to kind of blend more of the time throughout the week than go, 12-hour days, 5 days a week.
It's very hard, if not impossible, to disconnect when you're an entrepreneur, for sure. You've been pushing a lot in the last few years, a lot. Watching your content, I could feel, people can feel your level of energy. It's the same for me, actually. People sometimes say, oh, you look so destroyed. And I was like, yeah, I took a plane for 20 hours at minus 16 hours time difference. And then I went straight with Jesse Pollack. Like, obviously, I'm going to be fucked, guys. Like, it's normal. Have you ever struggled with mental health?
No. I think that 50 Cent said it best. He was given an interview and he said, depression is a luxury. And I was like, okay, that's going to catch some, headlines. Like, it's kind of a bold statement. And then he explained, he said, where I come from, people don't have time to be depressed. They're worried about where's their food going to come from. They're worried about their physical safety going to school or going to the mall or whatever, right? It's just like, there's a lifestyle where we don't have time to think about that stuff. Like, you're living your life because in his case, people don't have a lot and they're trying to fight their way and have mobility economically. I think that a lot of the mental health stuff that has become very popular today, some of it's true, but I think a lot of it is performative. I think there's a lot of people who we got it so good that we have time to concoct these like fake problems. So again, there are certain people 100% have real issues that they're dealing with, from demons to all kinds of issues, etc. That's been true for history, right? But if you look at some of these charts of the growth of mental health issues, it's like 5x, 10x growth in, let's call it the last decade or so. And it coincides with, if you see all your friends constantly talking about this thing, there's a lot of people all of a sudden that start saying, hey, I'm interested in that too. Right? And you see this, one of the craziest statistics that I saw is, I think 1 in 5 middle school or high schoolers now identifies as LGBTQ. Right?
I think this one is a subject we could probably talk for. It's something I never understood, to be honest.
Yeah,
I don't live in the US, so it's also like.
But here's the reason why I say it is, there is a social pressure and phenomenon, and it, again, it's like the psychology and sociology of this stuff. To me, it's fascinating intellectually, because it's very hard to pinpoint, because it's not a science or a math, right? A lot of times you can't even recreate it. And so what you're trying to understand is you're trying to understand something that is undeniable, right? You go and they do the surveys, they do look at the data, whatever, like it's mental health has exploded. A lot of these things. Why? And you have to look at it and say, well, there's probably some people who had issues that previously never reported it or never talked about it, or it's the classic like men used to think that it was a sign of weakness or something, and so now they're willing to talk about it. So there's definitely some of that going on, where you would expect the numbers to go up, but 10x type growth stuff. And so I always just go back to my philosophy in life is, whenever anyone does anything, whenever anyone says anything, whatever, I always ask myself 2 questions: are they hurting anyone else? And are they happy? And I think that that's, for me, that's the mentality that works, is if that person's not hurting anyone and whatever they're doing makes them happy, good for them. I'm happy that they're happy. And in a weird way, there's a lot of things that people do in society, which you and I may not see the benefit of, but maybe they get peace of mind out of it. Somebody one time said to me, they said they meditate a lot. And I was like, I just never really got into meditation. It's for whatever reason. Like I understand why it would be valuable to somebody, but if I sit on the floor and I, am quiet, I fall asleep. Right. So like, I just, for whatever reason, never got into it. And he said, well, tell me about your day. I started telling him. I didn't get past 9 o'clock. And he said, oh, you meditate. I said, what do you mean? He says, you work out and run every morning. He goes, what do you do while you're running? So I'm thinking. Meditating. That's the meditative thing that you do for yourself. And so I just think a lot of times it's very easy to put these things in buckets, but instead having the mentality of, are you happy? Like does what you're doing make you happy, and are you hurting anybody? And if you get the right answers on those, good for those people.
Are you happy?
I'm ecstatic.
What makes you happy? What makes you ecstatic?
I know what I want out of life. And I've been very fortunate through decisions that I and those around me have made to be getting that out of life. And so, there's a quote that Naval Ravikant once said, which is a sign of intelligence is getting out of life what you want from it. And I don't know if intelligence is assigned to that, but I do know that happiness is assigned to it, because the gap between expectations and reality is where unhappiness is measured. And so for me, it's just, hey, what are the things that are important to me? As long as I can do those things, then everything else, what do I have to complain about? And I always joke with people that, they say, hey, how you doing? I say, I got no complaints. I'm saving them all for my next life, right? It's just like, what is there for me to complain about? Other people have serious issues and all kinds of things they're going through. But I was born in the United States of America. I was born in a situation where I was a healthy person. I grew up in a family where my parents loved me. I had, brothers to constantly hang out with and enjoy and do all this stuff, whatever. It could be way worse.
You mentioned before the explosion of mental health kind of awareness. Another thing that exploded in the last 5, let's say 10 years, but that has probably less popularity than mental health is crypto and Bitcoin. We have to talk about that a bit. How did you get so fascinated by the world of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies?
I think a lot of people don't want to admit it, but most people are drawn because they think they can make money. Right?
Of course.
People show up and it's like, we're going to change the world. We're going to shut the fuck up. You're showing up because you think you can make money. Now, the beautiful thing about it is you show up for the capitalistic, kind of personal financial benefit, but then you learn about a lot of the ethos and things like that. And so Marty Bent, a friend of mine, has this great quote. He says, people come for the money, meaning they show up for the profits, but they stay for the money. They realize the generational importance of something like digital sound money. And so I actually think there is this like spectrum of learning that goes on. And so when you show up, you don't know a lot, but you have this really, really deep desire to make money. That's what drew you there. By the time you've gone through the whole spectrum, you know a lot. And it's not that you're now a non-economic actor, but the like make profit is not nearly as high on the list of what it was when you started. And for me, that was definitely a piece of it. A kid pitched me on the idea of you buy these computers, you plug them in and it prints money. How much are the computers, right? Like that sounds interesting. The other thing was I had really heard about Bitcoin twice before, in 2012 and then 2014. And I dismissed it both times. And so by the time I heard it a third time, price had gone up, right? There's a bunch of different factors. I said to myself, what did I miss? I became obsessed with this idea that these other people I knew saw something I didn't see. I got to catch up. How do I do the work? And so, once you're convinced to do the work, I don't know anyone who's gone and really spent the time and then walked away and been like, oh, this is going to be a 0.
Yeah, I think Michael Saylor says, if you spend 30 hours studying Bitcoin, I've never met anyone who spent 30 hours studying Bitcoin and not thinking it's an amazing idea. You used to be a Bitcoin maxi. That's how you actually built your personal brand around Bitcoin. So I have to quote your book again. Surround yourself with people who are intellectually humble enough to change their mind. What made you change your mind on non-Bitcoin related cryptocurrencies and network?
I was never what many people would consider like a hardcore Bitcoin maximalist. But I made a very conscious decision about what I was willing to talk about publicly. And so let me explain. When I first started, I actually started out mining Ethereum or Ether.
I remember that.
We bought GPUs, we were doing that. So my first interaction with the industry, I kind of skipped over Bitcoin, and it was with the Ethereum. And it was really just the GPUs were easier to buy than the ASICs. And so the guy who was helping me do it, that's what he preferred, right? And so that's what I did. No one pitched me on Bitcoin or crypto or any of that stuff. It was literally buy the computers, print money. In, I think 2017, I think there's a tweet that I posted, and I do my best, unless I make like a factual error that could be like detrimental, I pretty much don't delete tweets, right? And that's been my philosophy for a long time. And so I'm pretty sure there's a tweet out there somewhere of like me being like, yeah, I'm not into the Bitcoin thing. Like I like Ethereum or something, right? But what I saw when everything started to crash in 2018 was I better learn about this. It went up a lot, but I actually don't even know what I own. And so I need to go learn. And as I did a lot of the work, right, I got a lot of conviction in Bitcoin. I still held at certain times other assets, whether I'd mined the Ethereum, investing in our funds, right? We had exposure to different crypto assets or different fund managers, whatever. But I said to myself, the thing that to me was the lowest risk in the entire industry was Bitcoin. And Bitcoin in a weird way was almost like the index for all of crypto. If Bitcoin goes up, everything else is going up. If Bitcoin's going down, everything else is going down. But like this is the S&P 500 of crypto. I'm not comfortable talking about, definitely, pre 2020, and even pretty much today, about these other coins and things like that, because I feel like having this large audience, people are going to listen to me. And so if I start talking about every, new shitcoin that comes out, the odds are that people are going to lose money, right?
Absolutely.
And so I took the perspective of the lowest risk asset is actually the thing that has the highest confidence over a long period of time. And I can choose to be short-term oriented or long-term oriented. And I chose to be long-term oriented. And so over the years, I got plenty of shit from all these different, people in crypto, whatever. But
we'll
said,
talk about that.
Yeah, but you know what I said to myself is, I know what I'm doing is working because at times the Bitcoiners are pissed at me, and at times the shitcoiners are pissed at me. And so actually, like, I don't want to be explicitly put in a box. It's kind of like a political party. I'm not a Republican. I'm not a Democrat. I'm an independent. Same thing in the crypto world is I don't want to be put in any one box. I don't want to pledge allegiance to, a one cult over another. Yeah. And so it has allowed me to think very independently. But that, hey, in a very kind of tribalistic industry, there are times where, the XRP people are mad at me one day, the ETH people are mad at me the next, and then the Bitcoiners are mad, and you're just like, look, I believe what I believe. If I'm wrong, I'll get punished in the market for it, and you just keep going.
Yeah, I took a very similar approach, but later on, right? So I was thinking, I started this podcast in December 2022, just after 1 month after FTX crash, and I was like, okay,
it's good timing.
The only way, I was here 2018, 19, and I knew it came back, so I was like, this is gonna come back, right? But it felt like shit, and I just had lost $6 million in Luna in 2 days, like 6 months before. And it was very bad, but for everyone. But one thing I was thinking was there's really missing a sort of like Lex Fridman of crypto, like a place where I can go and talk to the big people in the industry So I was thinking, I understood media. I was like, either I can go full Bitcoiner, but there's already these people and there's probably other things of value that are created in the space. But the only people I can talk to are the big founders of these things, right?
Mm-hmm.
I cannot talk to anyone else, or the media game would be, oh, it's meme coin time. I'm gonna shield all the meme coin shit, and then you get the views and the engagement, but you know it's wrong and you know it's gonna wreck everyone, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you don't do it.
Well, then you're gonna lose trust with the audience over
Absolutely.
time. Yeah.
So my idea was, how do I interview the biggest people in crypto, not only Bitcoin, so it's much safer, right? It's harder because I get to get there at the top, like founder of Solana, founder of Ripple, etc. But I have this open-mindedness that Bitcoiners don't necessarily have, right? But while at the same time, not going too much down the risk curve and going all the shitcoin world where people will get wrecked, right? So absolutely. What's the biggest mistake you've ever made in life?
I'm not going to count mistakes of omission. There's plenty of things where, saw an investment opportunity and didn't do it. And like, in hindsight, that was dumb, whatever. In particular, one company I passed on just got bought for $2 billion. It's like a $20 million seed round. I'm like, that was dumb. Another one, I had previously invested in the founder. He started another company, but he was like kind of working on it, but he really had another business. So I was like, he's not like really serious about it. $1.7 billion business today. So, you get those things that are like kind of professional stuff. I think personally, you're always going to regret. I went to this dinner for work. I didn't go home and see my kid. And actually, even if it's a good dinner, I think it eats away at you a little bit. And you're like, did I really need to go? Right? So there's like stuff like that. But I would say the biggest mistake is probably time-based. I wasted a lot of time when I was younger. And you could argue that I was doing things that eventually made me who I am, and therefore, it was time kind of well spent in like an indirect way. But I've always been very impressed by young people who know what they want and they start working at it at a very young age, and they have a high degree of intentionality. I feel like I have that now, but when I was a teenager, I didn't. And so what is the most expensive asset you have is time. And so your biggest mistake, if you did waste time, a lot of time, is probably that.
Time misallocation. It's really interesting what you say. I regret going to this dinner instead of going to see my wife and kids. Because I started recently to think, I live in Singapore. I'm from Switzerland. My parents live in Switzerland. We're very close. We have an amazing relationship, but I don't spend enough time with them and I don't call them enough. And now I'm like, I watched a series where the father dies from cancer. And I was like, fuck, man, like, I need to call my parents multiple times a week instead of once every 2 or 3 weeks because who gives a fuck? Like, if I make a bit more money here or there, like, these are my parents. Like, this doesn't make sense. So I started to do that recently. And I think I start to get more and more into this mind space. Calling my sister and my parents more often. So basic. But
one thing that people who hang out with me probably are all going to laugh when they hear this. I'm notorious. I'm always on the phone. And part of it is like I'm always trying to like learn, right? And get information and do all that stuff. But if I have 5 minutes and I don't have anything going on, I can't meditate.
The same. It's terrible.
Right? So I call my brother. I call his brother. I call this, right? I call my wife. Like, whatever. I'm just like, let me just, stay moving, right? And so, I just started one day just saying, hey, there's a group of people. I'm going to call them every day. Every day.
Nice.
Because the way I am is if you tell me to call them 3 times a week, I'm calling them 0 times a week. But if I know it's every day, okay, every day, right? And so, maybe that's the sin of having the mentality I have, but it's like either you do it every day or you're not going to do it at all.
Another thing I read in your book, arguing with strangers on the internet is a waste of time. When did you understand this?
Too late. Look, every once in a while, still somebody will say something, and there's a guy recently. He, I don't even remember what I tweeted. I tweeted something, and he, basically was like, "You don't understand pretty much, he listed like 1,000 things. It was like, basically, you're an idiot. That's what he said to me. And I said, this guy's like some big shot Wall Street guy. Why is he spending his time writing this super eloquent tweet, like talking shit to me? So I said, I think that this guy is probably actually really insecure. I'm going to go find out why. So I went on the internet, Googled around, and I found his returns. He hasn't beat the S&P in 20 years, right? Like cumulatively. So I tweeted, hey man, for you claiming I don't know any of this stuff, seems like your returns prove you don't either, right? And he was real pissed and freaking out, you know, also whatever. In hindsight,
Just ignore. Yeah.
well, on one hand, you're like, look, if you just let people walk all over you, everyone will try to do it, right? But on the other hand, I got enjoyment out of it. I kind of felt like I stepped back in the ring. Like, all right, you want to talk some shit? Like, I talk shit with the best of them, right? It's just like, you're going to waste a lot of time if you're like, I'm going to be the king shit talker, right? So I said to my wife, this guy forgot who I am, and I need to remind him. Like, I'm not the guy that you want to be chirping at because I got too much time on my hand if you get my attention, where I will go find information, right? And there's another guy recently who tweeted some crazy thing at me, and I was like, oh, I know this guy is not chirping at me right now. So I went and I did some research, whatever, and I found an article that he wrote where he promised his audience he had 3 investing strategies to beat Bitcoin.
Good luck with that.
He deleted it off his website because he didn't beat Bitcoin. And so I have the archived website, right? And so it's just, again, I didn't tweet it, but I just said to myself, you know, I don't need to waste my time on this today.
But I have the website bookmarked in case, motherfucker.
But listen, if you come back, you know, there was another guy one time who is a founder of a company in crypto and chirping. I said, the more you chirp at somebody, the more you're hiding something. Went and I looked.
Absolutely.
I found on the website their terms of service were copy and pasted from their competitor.
You go deep, huh?
So I screenshotted it,
you go deep.
and when I tweeted it, and I said, "Hey man, before you chirp at me, you should probably clean up the house, right? Don't throw rocks in the glass house." Now again, it's just more so you're just like, look, let's all be friends.
Yeah,
everyone chill, right? I don't make a habit out of going after people. I always feel like, especially when you have a large audience, anyone that you proactively go after, you're punching down, even if they got a bigger audience than you. Like you're now using something that is a relationship of trust to punch down at someone, and it's not my style. I don't like it, whatever. But I always tell people I'm an excellent counterpuncher, right? If you get in the ring and you throw the first punch, I got a lethal counterpunch, and so you don't want to pride yourself on that stuff. But it's a good skill to have from time to time.
You have a big audience, huge audience. And when you make mistakes, you have to own them because they're all out there in public. Let's take an example of something that went wrong. BlockFi, a crypto lending company that went bust in 2022, like many others, most in the industry. BlockFi was not only a sponsor of your show, but you also probably said that it was one of your biggest personal investment. There was a lot of FUD against you for years. How do you deal with this huge FUD when you take risk publicly and it goes wrong, which happens all the time in entrepreneurship and investing?
That's the whole game. Is you take risk. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Now, what I will say is it is always easier to deal with a situation where the reason why something fails is because the company in this case is defrauded by a criminal, right? Doesn't make it right. Doesn't mean that it was any less painful. Doesn't mean that the people who, are upset about stuff, whatever, doesn't absolve any of that stuff. But it's easy to see how it happened, right? Versus there was many other situations of similar companies where we had actually passed on investing and there was nefarious, malicious, criminal, type activities. And so in this situation, it's like, okay, a bunch of these companies don't work. Why did they not work? And if you lump them all together, you're like, well, hold on a second. One is like the team is doing things that ultimately have been determined illegal. Another is the team got defrauded. And so it's a very tough situation. But the one thing that I walked away with that from was I said to myself, I didn't get treated any differently than any other user on the platform. I didn't, pull my money off the platform when other people, had money on the platform, any of that stuff, right? So we all went through it together. And it wasn't fun. I lost money, right? But I also knew that if you get credit on the way up, of course, you got to take it on the chin on the way down. And I did this thread where I said, I know that's how it works. So you got to take it. And I think there's a lot of people who would try to squirm out of it. They would try to, oh, this is unfair. Why is everyone attacking, blah, blah, whatever. Dude, you get all the credit on the way up. Everyone is so excited. You're getting invited to all this stuff. Everyone thinks you're a genius, whatever. When things go down, obviously the opposite is going to happen. And so just stand there and take it. But
you must have felt something. I asked Raul, because he also went through massive FUD into 2022, early 2023. And he told me, he was like, yeah, man, I spent 3 weeks. I think he called a friend of his in Spain who was a yoga teacher. And he said, for 3-4 weeks, I just stopped tweeting, stopped being online. And I was just doing yoga every day because people were really mean, even some really big people that he knew personally. Or for you, it's just, oh, listen, I'm built different. This is part of the game. I mean, we're all humans. You must have felt something like, man, this is really, really rough and strong.
You're frustrated. You are, nobody wants to hear people say, negative things to them, all that kind of stuff. But I remember at one point, I sat on the couch and I was just reading all the tweets. And my wife said to me, put your phone down. I'm not putting my phone down. And she said, why are you reading all of that? And I said, because I never, ever, ever want to forget this feeling. I'm going to read every single one of them. I read every single one of them. And there's certain people who they were waiting and they thought that, I was knocked out of the game and they came and they said all kinds of crazy stuff. I didn't forget. I know who those people are, right? There's a lot of people who were friends. All of a sudden they saw an opportunity to kind of boost themselves up by stepping on me, right? Now try to be my friend. I'm not interested in that stuff, right? And so on the flip side, there's a lot of people I know who, when all that stuff happened, called me and just said, how are you doing? They didn't care about the details. They didn't care about just, how are you doing? I remember those people, right? And so to me, again, it's for whatever reason, the way I'm wired, you're going through this situation. And I said to myself, what can I learn? And I read every single tweet for days. Read them and read them and read them and read them. Obviously, if you're programming your brain with people just, saying all kinds of crazy stuff, you don't feel good. But also, you realize that the lessons you can take out of this situation provide the foundation for what comes after. And so I think it's just, you have to understand, there's this great framework. I think the guy's name is Jeremy Giffen, if I remember correctly. He says that every person who achieves success, you can look and see in their career before the fall and after the fall. And it is only that you can achieve great things after the fall. Because before the fall is full of bravado, arrogance, overconfidence. It's just this ungoverned acceleration, and it feels amazing. You feel on top of the world, but you gotta go through some fire to be able to appreciate it. And so I actually think that we would be less successful as a business, less successful from an investment portfolio standpoint, et cetera, if we did not go through that situation. And, it is, it's kind of crazy because it was industry wide. That's what contagion ultimately is. So, I think that there's a lot of people, not just me, that, kind of went through that whole situation, and you don't want to lose money as an investor in a company. You don't want to lose money as a user of a platform. You said that you lost money on, Luna or whatever, right? It's not fun.
No.
But also,
it happens. It's part of the game, right?
But you also probably, I don't know, I don't want to speak for you, but like you probably actually are a better investor today having gone through that situation. Now, did you want to pay, I think you said $6 million. You want to pay $6 million for a lesson? Probably not. That's an expensive lesson. Yeah. But, it is a kind of a progression that, and one of the things that I found great kind of solace in maybe is there's a lot of guys that have been hyper successful that many people who are in the younger generations look up to as, heroes or role models or whatever. And when you go and you read their stories, fires, they crashed and burned at some point in their career.
You kind of have to. The advantage of crypto is you go through that very quickly. So if you're able to survive or to not dive completely afterwards, you will learn much faster, right? So that's for sure.
Yeah. And look, I think that there are companies now that are going to get built that are better structured because of a bunch of lessons that people learned. And also I think that, it humbles you, which if you really go back and look, if there's one big change that I would say that has happened for industry-wide, not me, you, and anyone industry-wide, the 2022 bear market humbled the industry in a healthy way.
Yeah.
Right. So there's still a lot of confidence. There's still a lot of excitement, all that kind of stuff. But the humbling of that market was because that was the first time we were on like the big stage. Right. 2017, like nobody is kind of like a corner of the internet. Nobody cared, whatever. But this was the first time that like Wall Street was knocking at the door. Mainstream media was covering it, all this stuff.
Yeah. Stadiums. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that humbling of the industry was really, really healthy. And I think that you can point to a bunch of the success that the industry has had since then and tie it back partially to that experience.
You were early to Bitcoin and crypto and early to podcasting, personal branding game. What's the next big trend that people don't understand yet or even ridicule, and that is early now?
There's a lot of them. I think that humanoid robots are going to be probably the single largest total addressable market on Earth. There's some great companies that are doing stuff there. I think that there's a ton of innovation that's happening in the energy market, where private companies are building large-scale solutions to some of our problems there. I think that a lot of people are excited about space, but they're thinking about space in terms of like, let's go to Mars. I'm an investor in a company called Varda, where they are manufacturing drugs in zero gravity in space and then bringing it back down to Earth. And so like using space to benefit us on Earth rather than exclusively use space to like get somewhere to another planet. So think like space, energy, humanoid robots. And then frankly, it sounds crazy, but like I think people are drastically underestimating kind of Bitcoin in the crypto industry, right? People inside the industry were like, it does, so obvious. People outside the industry, I still think are
it's still not popular at all, for sure. How do you know it's early in any of this industry? How do you feel?
I measure it two ways. One is I put together a lot of dinners of smart people that I know and kind of try to drive the conversation. And if you never hear anyone talk about it, it's early. But also, even better sign is if it's something that you have pretty deep conviction on and you suggest it to other people and there's a negative reaction, that's usually a pretty good sign. So one of the things that I always say is if you ever see me tweet something and a bunch of people start yelling and screaming about how stupid it is, I'm like, I'm close to the target, right? And it's just experience of, you start to learn what kind of a different idea looks like. And then really what you've got to be able to judge is it going to work or not? Because you got to be different and right to really kind of have outsized returns.
You spent 2 years writing a book. It's called How to Live an Extraordinary Life. What is an extraordinary life?
Whatever you want it to be, right? Everyone's is different. What I want and what I think is my extraordinary life is very different than somebody else. I spend a lot of time with my family. There's a lot of people who say, I never want to be married. I never want to have kids. Shouldn't judge those people. Again, are you hurting anyone? Are you happy? Right? If that's what makes that person happy, amazing. How many people in the world would love to be happy? Right? And so part of the paradox of the book is how to live an extraordinary life. Sounds like I'm going to tell you how to do it. But actually, how you do it is all about frameworks that then you have to personalize to your specific or extraordinary life, right? I can't tell you what your extraordinary life is. Only you can decide that. And so I think it's a very personal experience.
What is success to you?
Just being happy, right? That there's, look, your life can change very quickly for the better and for the worst. I know people, just look at, my situation. I remember my wife and I being in a studio apartment in New York City where it wasn't very glamorous. Nobody was like, I want that guy's life, right? To very quickly, you make some good decisions, you figure some stuff out, and you're like, oh, my life is changing, right? It's improving. That's great. That can happen. It's part of the beauty of America is we have this economic and social mobility, right? We have kind of the American dream, all stuff. But I also know an incredible number of people where the opposite happens. So it works in both ways, right? You have upwards mobility, but you also have downwards. And so what it does is it requires you to have the hope and the belief and the aspiration to have the upwards movement, but you better be humble enough and aware of the risks enough to prevent the downward mobility as well. It really keeps you honest.
Some people say you have to panic all the time, right?
It is only the paranoid survive.
Yeah, paranoid. Absolutely. This one hits too hard too. The more you help other people become successful, the more success finds you.
Be a problem solver, right? If you solve problems for other people, somehow value accrues back. I recently said one of the best ways I found that people make money is help other people make money. And somehow the universe has a way of making sure some of the profits make their way into your pocket. And so it goes back to this idea that, you can look at the world in a zero-sum way and constantly be in extraction mode. How do I extract economic value? How do I extract value from my friendships? How do I extract, time, whatever? Instead, you can also look at it from a service mindset. How do I help that person be successful? How do I help that person make money? How do I help that person find, better relationships, etc.? And what I found in my life is the more you try to extract, the more the well is dry. But the more that you give, the more that there's abundance. Yeah. And so
easier said than done.
Of course. Yeah. Right? And it's easier to talk about than follow your own advice sometimes. But it's a true, kind of law of the universe.
In business, in everything, right? But in business and in crypto, it's terrible. Everybody's just an extractor and coming and trying to take. And I'm like, for me, the way I've built this media and podcast is just that. I'm never going to ask anything to anyone. A bit of your time, ever. And then I'll build, you talk about these private dinners. I do the same with all my podcast guests. And I'm just like, here, like, for you, what do you want? Hey, maybe you want this intro, maybe you want this thing. And I'm never going to ask anything. And then they come and say, hey, I want to sponsor, right? Like after 6 months, right? And it's just being patient and trying to provide value, which most people don't do. And I realized if you have this mindset, you're already in the top 0.01% because most people don't think about giving. They just think about taking.
100%.
Watch someone's daily habits today and you will understand what their future looks like.
Of course.
Of course.
Right? I don't know that many people who are lazy, who are rude to people, who are constantly screwing people over, who don't take care of themselves, who don't take care of the people around them, all these like negative associated activities and daily actions. And then somehow a positive outcome of, high degree of success pops out. Are there edge case examples? Of course. But for the most part, the outcomes in your life are really tied back to the decisions you make. And are there certain people who start at more of a disadvantage than others? Obviously. Yeah. But again, specific to America, the economic and social mobility that is available in this country is unbelievable. And so it's not easy, but people can change their life by making certain decisions. And hopefully the more that technology becomes pervasive, et cetera, knowledge and the friction to knowledge collapses, more people have information. And then really it just comes down to, are you acting or not, right? Are you doing the things that are necessary to get the outcome that you want?
We talked quite a lot about your wife and kids. How did becoming a dad change your perspective on life?
I already thought pretty long term, but now most of the decisions I make are focused on what is the outcome for them, but not in a weird, people say that stuff and they're talking about oh, if I do this thing, are my kids going to find out, or, whatever weird way people think about it. I think about it, every investment decision I make today is literally all of the money is theirs. I'm investing their portfolio. It's one thing for you to gamble with your money. You're going to gamble with your kids' money?
Probably you become much more responsible, yeah.
But also you become much more long-term thinking. You think a lot more about resilience. You think a lot more about compounding. You think a lot more about confidence level. It changes the way you think. Same thing with the businesses. And so, there's a lot of people who they just give away 100% of their money. I'm very much in the camp of, I want to build something where I then can have my kids eventually take over and run that thing. Not because I have some huge belief in world domination or something like that. I just think that building really, really valuable, resilient, long-term oriented things takes a lot of time. So 36, if I'm fortunate, I got 40 years. It probably takes more than 40 years, right? So if you need 100 years to build something, you better make sure you got somebody who can take the baton when you can't anymore. It's just a different way of thinking. Doesn't mean I'm better or more right or anything. It's just that's the way that I, am choosing to kind of pursue it.
Thank you so much, Pomp, for doing this. And thank you for taking the risks years ago to, not only go all in this crypto thing, but also this personal brand, because you inspired quite a lot of people. I'm one of them. And it's super cool to be just able to talk to you today.
I told you before we started, I already learned something from you today. So
we're not going to say what it is.
I appreciate you. And look, it's the beautiful thing about this entire industry is you never become the master, right? You're always a student. You're always constantly learning. Things change so fast that it's very intellectually stimulating that way. But also my greatest memories are from the people that I met along the way. And some of my dearest friends I met years ago, and we got to know each other. But also I've met tons of people where I talked to them one time and I learned something from them. And so it's just this very accepting, collaborative, kind of learning oriented community. And for somebody like me who's, obsessed with that type of stuff, it's like the perfect industry. So thank you.
Thank you.